Hello and welcome to the LinkedIn Collective Studio at Cannes. I'm Josh Graff, Managing Director for LinkedIn across EMEA and LATAM. I'm joined today by Paul Janssen, Senior Director of Global Programs and Grant Making at Outright International, to discuss a topic that is both timely and important, and that is the state of LGBT+ rights globally and the unique role that the private sector plays in advancing diversity and LGBT+ initiatives. So Paul, a warm welcome to you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Josh. It's really an honor to be here.
I want to start off by highlighting the incredible work that Outright does around the world. So we'd love you to share a little bit more about the history of the organization. I think it's been around for almost 35 years, the work that you do and the why behind it.
That's correct, as you say. Like, we have been around for 35 years already. And next year is our big jubilee for 35. And in those 35 years, lots of things have happened. Like, we made really good progress in equality, anti-discrimination, anti-violence for LGBTIQ people across the world. It started off as an organization that was doing human rights violation documentation. So really making sure that everybody knew all the nonsense that LGBTIQ people had to endure throughout the world and throughout times. So that was the start of Outright, but later on we evolved into an organization as we are now, working on very diverse topics like, again, the human rights of LGBTIQ people for inclusion and equality is at the heart of our work, but also we're making sure that we're resourcing the movement on a global scale, making sure that all these other organizations in other countries are able to do their work. We are looking at inclusive development, like how come there's so much programs being developed on international development, like the Sustainable Development Goals, but the LGBTIQ people are not mentioned anywhere. Hello, we have to change that. We're also doing a big program now on the humanitarian sector. How come the humanitarian organizations don't have a clue how to reach out or how to reach LGBTIQ people in terms of, and in times of crisis? Like, we have the experience of our Ukraine work after the full-scale invasion, that LGBTIQ people were not reached. And that's how we set up our own LGBT Ukraine fund to support the people in Ukraine. And so it shows an enormous gap of the work, and what we're doing is actually filling a gap. We're now in times when it's more crucial than ever because, yes, we made huge gains over the last 20 years, 30 years, but we see that we're losing the gains.
Yeah.
And that's very scary. Like, we see a highly polarized world, and we see that things that seem so simple and so obvious are being taken from us.
Absolutely. I think we're in Pride Month at the moment, and you can very easily see rainbow flags being sort of waved from businesses around the world, often just for the month of Pride. And I think to some, that also signifies the progress that's been made in LGBT+ rights over the last 20, 30 years. And don't get me wrong, there's significant amount of progress. But at the same time, to your point, there are well-funded organizations that are chipping away at rights. And it feels like in certain countries around the world where you thought they would be enshrined in law in perpetuity, they are starting to take a step back.
Absolutely. And therefore, it's so important that businesses are leading the way as well. We can't have one sector or the other chipping out, not at this time frame.
Yeah.
And the significance of companies and the private sector showing that they're on board with diversity and that they stand for the causes that we all fight for, the inclusion and equality of LGBTIQ people, is so important. And it's like, we saw big gains, as you were saying. Like, for example, the 2021 standards of conduct from the UN really were a big moment, and it really helped companies to define their path and their way in doing so. But like, there's much more that needs to be done. Like, first of all, like, companies need to make sure they're not violating the human rights of LGBTIQ people. It sounds like an open door, but we have sometimes examples that it might go into the wrong direction. So people need to be very mindful and need to be aware what the human rights are. And then, of course, like, for your suppliers and everybody, make sure again that you adhere to the human rights standards that we all want to adhere to. So make sure that you implement, walk the talk, as we say. I totally understand that it's not always possible to do it in full public.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's like silent diplomacy or whatever, but let's do it and don't shy away. Now more than ever in these very scary and polarizing times.
Yeah, I think it's great and very sage advice, this idea of living the standard, breathing the standard, but also holding others accountable for that standard as well. And increasingly, that is becoming very important for talent attraction and talent retention. We are in Cannes at the moment. It's the largest advertising festival in the world. People spend billions of dollars on advertising around the world every year. It features on our screens, on our phones on a daily basis, and can be an incredibly powerful medium for change. And so we'd love your perspective on anything you think that can be done within the advertising industry, anything that you've observed that marketers around the world are doing really well in this space.
No, absolutely. And look, it's one thing to have like good policies in place and good laws in place, but like we also need social acceptance. And I think the marketing and advertising industry is so crucial in that.
Yeah.
Make LGBTIQ people visible. And that we're normal people, that everybody else, with the same rights and the same desires and everything that everybody else has as well. Sometimes I get the feeling that people treat us as something Martian or weird or whatever, but like we're like any other person. And therefore it's so important that the marketing and advertising industry is showing us in all our diversity and all our forms and with all the good things and bad things that we do. That's what it's for. Like, for example, families. Like I love companies that show diverse families in their marketing and advertising campaigns. That's crucial. Why can't LGBTIQ people be good parents? Like, it's important to show that. It's important to show to get better social acceptance and let people see that, yeah, LGBTIQ people are like any other, as like my neighbor or anyone else.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's so important that that we don't roll back on that. And we have good examples like Google, Scotiabank, IKEA, other companies. There's a lot of companies that are really doing it right.
Yeah.
And they should be prepared for some backlash because not everybody, as you know, in this society likes messages like that. But we have to insist that we want to live in an inclusive and equal world for everybody. And therefore, it's so important to lead the way.
I agree. I think representation in advertising is so important. As a kid who grew up, a gay kid who grew up in the 80s in the UK, it was, I was going to say very rare, but I think it didn't actually happen. There was no real representation of LGBT people in advertising on television. And sort of now, fortunately, it's changing. It's evolved very rapidly over the last 5 or 10 years, but there's still a lot of countries around the world that have very repressive policies where it's not permitted to be out. And if anything, actually, it's criminalized in about 64 countries around the world. So it feels like we still have a long way to go. Coming back to being in sort of Cannes at the advertising festival, we at LinkedIn did some research of marketers around the world just in advance of Cannes. And what was good to see and reassuring to see was that diversity, equity, and inclusion was still front of mind for marketers. What was interesting, though, is when you then broke that down, LGBT plus inclusion was at the bottom of the list. And I was intrigued to hear your perspective on perhaps why that's the case, as well as what you think we can collectively do to ensure that it remains a priority for brands around the world.
It doesn't surprise me because, for example, there's other themes and topics that are less controversial. Having said that, I think it's really important to make sure that within companies there are champions that are driving this agenda. So even though we might compete with movements that have been around a lot longer, so are much further ahead in their advocacy, I think within the companies we need champions that say, no nonsense. LGBTIQ people are part of the deal. We are a company that stands for inclusion. But if we look at some of the research that has been done, for example, of our Outright board member, Fabrice Houdard, who did research among the boards of the Fortune 500, only 0.7% of the board members were open and out and proud LGBTIQ people. 0.7 of many, many board members. So we need more champions and more people that stand for this cause and make sure that it gets the place and attention that it deserves.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think role modeling is critically important. And I also think that allies are absolutely fundamental in this fight for rights, whether it's LGBT plus inclusion, whether it's gender equity, like ensuring that you have allies around that table, critically important. I touched a moment ago on the research that we had done. I want to touch on the research that Outright had done, specifically this notion of the right to register. So we'd love you to share with our guests sort of what is it, why is it important, and what are the limitations for organizations that don't have the ability to register in a country?
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. And I get that question a lot, like, why do you care about registration? Really? It's like a bureaucratic thing. Like, it doesn't matter that much. But people have to understand that in many countries, the LGBTIQ organizations are the lifeline for LGBTIQ people and communities to get the services, to get the attention, to lead the fight for equality, justice, against impunity and everything. So therefore, it's so important that organizations can register, because without registration, they don't exist. They won't have access to funding. They won't be seen as a credible partner to be at the table where decisions are being taken. So in our research, we found that in 74 countries, LGBTIQ organizations are not allowed to register as LGBTIQ organizations. 74 countries. That is a lot. That's about a third of the countries that we have in the world. Isn't it crazy?
Yeah, it's crazy and slightly depressing. Let's be honest.
Yeah. So, and therefore, it's important again that companies maybe can support LGBTIQ organizations to and do the advocacy and say, well, actually, in a free and open society, any civil society should have the right to register, regardless what the theme or topic is. And like the excuse what we often hear is like, oh, it's against the values and norms of our society, or they might corrupt our children or whatever. It has nothing to do with the functioning of the organization and being registered. Simple as it is. Like, states have to uphold the rights, the fundamental freedoms of the right to association that anyone has, including LGBTIQ organizations. And that's, like, for me, an easy message to advocate for and to fight for by anyone who is on board with our cause.
And as you said, it's in the absence of the right to register, it makes it incredibly challenging to make any form of significant progress. And if you look throughout history, any movement that has made significant progress is often registered in some capacity, so they have the legal right to exist.
Yeah, it's not for nothing that states really try to block registration of LGBTIQ organizations in any way that they can, whether it's an NGO or if people go for another form, for example, like a limited company. Like, states don't like it. They want to block our progress, and they do anything to assure that LGBTIQ people will not have access to that right and advocate for the equality and inclusion that we deserve.
Thank you. And just to close us up, if there were sort of one or two pieces of very sort of clear advice or guidance that you would give to people listening today, perhaps they're sitting there thinking, I'd like to do something, or I lead an organization, or I sit within an organization and I want to drive change, what would those be?
First and foremost, like, link with your local LGBTIQ organization wherever you are. Make sure that you understand what's happened. Make sure that you understand what the agenda is that people are fighting for. Get in touch with organizations like Outright to get advice, like, what else can you do? But first and foremost, don't shy away. These are scary times. I know. We all feel the polarization. We all feel all kinds of nonsense that's coming our way. But therefore, now more than ever, we should be visible. We should be open. We should be proud who we are and give that message everywhere. And therefore, like, for people working in marketing and advertising, again, make us visible. Don't shy back from that. It's so important.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you. I think a lot of times people are perhaps anxious about saying or doing the wrong thing, but it's really important to know that if you are sort of watching this, if you're a marketer, if you work in the advertising sector, there are a lot of people around you that can help you on this journey, that have deep expertise in the sector. As you said, you can certainly connect with a team at Outright or find an organization that is local to you to be able to share that local expertise. Paul, thank you so much for joining us today. It is very much appreciated. We loved your insights. Take care.